Not many people can say they've met their hero and their guardian angel. I met both on the same day. When I held Nick in my arms for the first time, I felt he was destined for something great. Nick grew to be a happy little boy, smart, funny, always playing games. He loved to sing and dance, and loved to play on his Wii. One day his mother called me and told me she noticed he was covering his eye while on the computer. When she sent me a picture, I knew there was something wrong. Nick's left eye had suddenly crossed inward. After seeing an eye specialist, we decided to take him to the hospital for tests. He had blood tests, x-rays, and MRI. The doctors found nothing abnormal and sent him home. They diagnosed him with Bell's palsy and said to be patient, that it might get worse before it gets better. So we waited, and it got worse. The following week, the whole left side of his face was paralyzed. I called his doctor, who reminded me it might get worse before it gets better. Another week passed, and the other side of his face was drooping. He could barely keep one eye open. I called again, same message, just wait. During the third week of waiting, Nick wasn't eating, wasn't playing, very much not himself. I called the doctor again, begging for help. At this point, he called in a favor to have the head of neurology look at Nick during his lunch hour. It only took 5 minutes for him to know something serious was going on. The neurologist picked up my son and ran him to the MRI. March 11th was the second worst day of my life. That day I heard the words no parent should have to hear: your son has cancer. All I could think of was, how is this possible? Just 4 weeks before, he was with me at my house, being his normal playful self. 3 weeks after that first visit to the hospital, when we were told he just had Bell's palsy. Now we were told he has leukemia and stage 4 Burkitt's lymphoma, a very rare aggressive cancer. Before I knew it, he was in surgery to place a Mediport near his heart. Chemo is so toxic that they must place it directly into a major artery near the heart, where the blood flow can lessen the damage. Within a month of treatment, the chemo had all but cured his leukemia. Burkitt's, while rare and very aggressive, has a 90% cure rate. I was optimistic that he would pull out of this soon and be back to his old self in no time. Another month passed and his leukemia was gone. On the other hand, the brain tumor was not so cooperative. Since it wasn't responding, the doctors decided to increase the dosage of chemo. High-dose chemo is no joke. At one point, Nick developed sores in his mouth, throat, and digestive tract so painful that he had to be placed on a morphine drip for 2 days. Once Nick's sores went away, he was back to his old self. The doctors were often amazed at how well he was tolerating heavy-dose chemo after the first round. Often they would come to check the bags and make sure he was getting the proper dose. One of his doctors marveled and said, "You'd think we're giving this kid Kool-Aid in the port the way he's reacting." In fact, Nick was playing, laughing, singing most days, even though that poison was running through his body. We endured a few more months of heavy chemo. Around October, we got good news. The cancer numbers had significantly reduced. A week later, they declared Nick in remission. The cancer was gone. What a happy day that was. I already started planning his 5th birthday party in my head. It was going to be amazing, celebrating both his birthday and beating cancer. I even bought a bottle of champagne to celebrate. On the day before he was to be released from treatment and start his maintenance phase, I noticed the right side of his face was drooping. I called the doctor and they immediately took him in for an MRI. The doctor confirmed what I already knew. The cancer was back. The doctor explained that Burkitt's is easily cured and has a 90% success rate, but if it comes back after being gone, even for a day, Nick's chances of survival dropped to 3%. I was utterly devastated. This was the first time Nick ever saw me fall apart. I couldn't even stand after the news. Around this time, another wrinkle showed up. Nick was diagnosed with herpes. I learned that it's not uncommon for people undergoing chemo and radiation to get herpes, since it's so prevalent in the world. The virus was treatable and under control, but it was just another thing to deal with. A month into radiation, I got a call in the middle of the night. Nick was in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. He had had a seizure while sleeping. The tumors were still growing even when on radiation. At this point, all conventional treatments had failed. The last resort was to use new experimental treatments that were very early in their trials. So early, in fact, that Nick was only the third person in the world to receive it, and of those three, the only child. Shortly after Thanksgiving, the new treatment began. The night he was to be administered his first chemo cocktail, I went home to get some rest. When I came back in the morning, Nick was catatonic. I hit the emergency button. Doctors and nurses flooded into the room. A priest even showed up. They rushed Nick to the intensive care unit, where they were able to stabilize him. While in intensive care, I noticed his herpes outbreak was spreading. The chemo had completely nuked his immune system. They sent a sample of the virus out to check for resistance, but continued to treat him with expectation that his immune system would recover. The next day, Nick was having trouble breathing and had to be put on a ventilator. He was unconscious most of the time to prevent the pain from the air tube. The days that followed were full of tests and more tests, trying to figure out why he was having trouble breathing by himself. Then on December 17th, they did a brain activity scan and found that parts of his brain were not normal. On the 18th, they retrieved some fluid from his spine to check for the infection. The herpes had now entered his spinal fluid. The test to determine whether the virus was resistant to the medication or not came back way too late. On December 19th, doctors told me things were hopeless. An MRI showed the virus was covering most of his brain. Due to the impact on the brainstem and having no immune system, Nick had no way to fight this off. They gave him 3 antivirals the night before. It was no use. We were losing him. It was time to let go. Signing the order not to resuscitate him was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I still struggle with it to this day. Did I give up too soon? Could I have given him one more day? All the doctors assured me, with the level of damage he had already sustained, that even if he had pulled out of it, he would never be the same. And we still had the tumor to contend with. They said I was brave not to let him suffer. It didn't feel brave to let my child slip through my fingers. That night, they briefly took him off sedation so I could speak to him. He looked at me, and I told him, "Nick, you're gonna go be with God soon. It's okay. Don't be scared. I promise I'm gonna help as many kids as I can. Your name is gonna mean something." That night, they wheeled him out of PICU and took him back to his floor. Surrounded by all his family, Nick passed away quietly at 7:30 p.m. 10 minutes later, my aunt spotted movement in Nick's neck. His heart had started beating again. Then he started breathing. The doctor came back in and asked if I wanted her to do something. I asked, would it change the outcome? She said no. So we waited. He struggled to breathe. It was hard to watch. He was heavily medicated, so I knew that he was not in pain. So I figured, why not put on one of the movies that he loved so much, a movie he had fallen in love with at the hospital and seemed to symbolize the moment, Tangled. I let the movie run in the background while we kneeled at his bedside. Finally, I told him, "Nick, it's okay to stop fighting. You'll always be my hero. You can go now. We'll be okay." A few minutes later, as the credits rolled, Nick took his final breath. He finally rested at 11:30 p.m. on December 20th. 2 weeks later, we held a funeral for him. He was the only person being viewed that night at the funeral home. In a building that holds hundreds, it was standing room only. People were shoulder to shoulder. My co-workers at the school board came out, school board members, superintendent of schools Carvalho, nurses, doctors, friends, family, even the principal and teacher he was supposed to have that coming school year, all came to pay their respects to a little 5-year-old boy who had touched so many. At the end of the ceremony, we released Chinese lanterns to symbolize his release and honor him with a scene from the last movie he saw. It was a beautiful sight to see all those lanterns light the sky. I still light a lantern every December 20th. Nick was the bravest soul I had ever known. He rarely complained about pain or discomfort. Whenever I would ask him, he would say, "I'm okay, Daddy." During the process, Nick was not happy in his new environment in the PICU. He was used to having his own room on the cancer floor. There he had a decent-sized TV where he would have round-the-clock playlists of Tangled, Cars 2, The Incredibles, Finding Nemo, and Brave. He had a tablet, a Nintendo Game Boy, a portable DVD player. Normally he'd be using all at once: a movie on the TV, Mickey Mouse Clubhouse on the DVD player, a music video on the tablet, and playing Mario Kart on his Game Boy. He also had every snack he ever wanted. Whenever we came to the hospital, we came with bags of all the snacks he liked. In PICU, there were no snacks. There were no devices or entertainment. Only a small TV that hung from the ceiling and only tuned to PBS. He was attached to a bunch of machines that were constantly checking his vitals, so he had no use of his hands. As his body's ability to fight his illness declined, so did his lifestyle. And just before Nick passed, I made a promise to him to make things better for other kids who were going through the same thing he was going through. This is the promise that lies at the heart of the foundation. 4 months later, I filed the paperwork, and the foundation was born. To this day, nearly 8 years later, Nick continues to be my hero, and I know he's looking out for me and other kids like him. I guess guardian angels do play video games too.